Hi, this is Frances Valdez with Movement Talk, the show about immigration and other social justice issues. Today we're going to talk with Fran Watson and Oscar Hernandez.
Yes.
So I'd like to start off with asking our guests to just introduce themselves, tell a little bit about your story and what organizations you're working with. So maybe we can start with Fran.
Oh, yes. So, hi everybody. My name is Fran Watson. I am the president of the Houston GLBT Political Caucus. The work that I mainly focus on are LGBTQ issues and that intersection with racial justice. So I've been in this work for a few years now, starting out based on, there's always an issue that kind of gets things going. And so I experienced a few microaggressions when I was temporarily disabled. And then I had time to think, and then started helping a few folks out and got into the work, found out that there are so many issues. And then on top of it, how issues are layered. So that's where I am today.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Oscar.
Fran. Yeah. So my name is Oscar Hernandez. I'm undocumented. I work with United We Dream. I think I first started getting involved after the Sensenbrenner Act that was trying to be pushed in 2006, when they were trying to criminalize undocumented immigrants and people who either aid or basically encountered with undocumented people.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I got involved in a lot of immigrant rights groups. And I think I met Frances a few years ago when DACA was being introduced. And because of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, I was able to work where I'm working today. Actually, Frances was one of the people that helped me apply for DACA the first time in 2012. And I think after that, I always knew United We Dream was as an organization, and I participated. They do national congresses. It used to be every year, but they would get together in a different part of the country. And I would get to connect with a lot of other undocumented immigrants. And I really loved the organization, what we were doing, what they were doing at the time, because I wasn't working with United We Dream. But after I got DACA, I got involved with United We Dream, and we've been helping people apply for Deferred Action for Child Arrivals up until these elections. And now our goals has been to really organize and mobilize the community and make sure that undocumented youth are getting involved and getting our hands dirty.
Thanks. So you mentioned the elections, and I think I'd like to hear about how your communities are feeling after the elections and where you feel that the work is going forward into 2017.
I think to start with the end of your question, I think the work is going to be a lot of coalition building. Like I said, I work with mostly issues with the LGBTQ community, and with that community, it is not a monolithic community. Our community touches so many, whether it's race, gender, the immigrant community, undocumented community, criminal justice reform. We're working in all of these. Our lives are affected by this. And so with what's happening on the national stage, and I know here in Harris County we had some great victories, but I know that there's federal legislation or federal legislation, different laws that have been put into place that could be particularly, that could be undone. That's going to be an issue. And I think we're nervous, one, that rights could be rolled back, and that for the LGBTQ community, and then for folks within, that live in the intersections, that's our fear. And so that's what we're trying to organize now to push back against that.
Could you give an example of what you think could be rolled back?
So, for instance, here in Texas, in Houston, our non-discrimination ordinance did not pass. However, we do have non-discrimination ordinances in other cities across Texas: San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, and so there are bills that have been introduced at the Texas legislative level that will, one, undermine those, and then prohibit any new non-discrimination ordinances to come about. And that's happening because even when President-elect got elected, you heard a news conference saying that now the national executive branch matches the Texas executive branch, so that there would be, this agreement going on. So we're already seeing that people are ready to roll back, introduce bills, that'll hurt the community.
Thanks. So Oscar, what is it that the undocumented community is concerned about right now?
Well, I think we're concerned about the same issues that we were under Obama, mass deportations that continue to happen. up to this day. But I think what's added to this was from this new election. What's added to this from the election is that there's a culture of this like white supremacist ideology that's being pushed, that has always been pushed. I guess now it's more obvious than what it used to be, and then it's even more obvious as to see who the president is putting in his cabinet. This idea of mass deportations or deporting over 2 to 3 million people, that's nothing new. That's something that's already been happening under Obama. But now reinforcing it and running on a platform of deportations, it really means that those 2 to 3 million can actually multiply into a larger amount of people. And a lot of it has to do not necessarily who or the community is or the behavior of our community. It has to do more with how the administration defines what a criminal is, or what the words they like to use, criminal aliens. So when the administration says things like we're only deporting criminals, like who are they talking about, and what kind of laws are going to be pushed to criminalize people? Because I'm undocumented, I currently drive without a license. Well, not currently because I have DACA. I'm able to have a license, but I have a lot of family members and friends who can't get a license, so they drive without a license. So does that mean is that going to change into a felony to drive without a license? Is it going to be a felony for an undocumented person to jaywalk? And I don't think that's far from something. I don't think it's just speculation. I think that if you know American history, you can see how these laws have been put in place in the past, and just by the backwards thinking of this administration, how it's a real possibility that they could be in place in the near future. So the community is, we're like myself and my family, the community is frightened about what could happen. But luckily, a lot of the youth and the people who've been here for so long are also looking for ways to get involved, looking for ways to make a difference, and really learning from the history of the U.S. and what has been pushed in the past, and what we can learn to make sure that those things either don't happen, or make it as difficult enough to where they don't happen within these next 4 years, and then it could be a political shift after those 4 years. So I guess for us, deportations is an issue, but there's also a intersectional work, as you were talking about, Fran, because what does it mean for what does it mean for mass detention centers? What does it mean for when people get arrested and put in these detention centers, and the mass incarceration that happens in the U.S. That arrest immigrants, no matter immigrants, which we're specifically talking about, like black and brown people, and then other marginalized community that get arrested and put in detention centers and end up in a detention center for months, or it could be years before people get deported, or in many cases even see a trial. So it's a pretty it's a very difficult moment to digest what could happen, but I think that we want to be proactive and see what we can do to combat what's going to happen in the next 4 years.
So y'all both use this term intersectional. Or maybe y'all have different ideas of what that means. Could you explain, maybe from your perspective, what intersectional means to you?
You want to take that?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, intersectional came from Dr. Crenshaw's, who started when we were talking about the feminist movement, the women's liberation movement, that once that was happening, it was just this white movement, right? It was just white women on the front lines, and so there were other women that were being left out. So when we talk about intersectional, it's really, and from the work that I do, is that everyone comes with multiple identities. Like, I am a black woman, I am a lesbian, I am a cisgender woman, meaning I'm not trans, but all of these different marginalized identities, we have to take into account everything. We can't just talk about the LGBTQ community and only use it from a certain lens, from a white lens. We have to take into account Latinx people that are a part of the movement. We have to think about and what oppression and actions from that oppression come taken into account. We have to think about what happens when we think about black people and black bodies, and when you add that queerness. So it's these different layers and these multiple oppressions that come together that's how we actually start to kind of defeat this, because we have to see every aspect of it. So.
Yeah, I think that intersectional is. I think you're absolutely right, and it's for us. It's immigrant rights. LGBTQ rights are immigrant rights. Same with the Black community, with the Asian community, and the Muslim community. Just every marginalized community that's out there. It's really what affects us all. Like when we're talking about the deportation, it's about putting Black and brown people in prison, and then understanding that the over 2 million people who are already in prison in the U.S. And the laws that are placed unjust towards people, whether they're undocumented or citizens. So to us, it really means understanding that the advancement of one community should be the advancement of all. And when one community is oppressed, then that means we all are. So I think for us, the intersectional work it's always a very difficult thing. It's a very challenging thing to move together. But I think that the more we learn from each other and how we interact with these communities, I've seen a vast difference within the last decade of what intersectional means and for different marginalized groups. As where before we weren't able to know, like you were talking about cisgender, right? Where it's very difficult for someone who's never been in a space where there was people who identify different sexually or transgender people, and they don't really know how to act, and because they never been in that space, unintentionally it causes problems. But I think within the last 4 years, the last decade, we've tried really hard to see how do we behave, how do we really make an inclusive space for people to actually get involved and see what is it that affects us all, and then move together in that movement. I think that's been a huge progress that we've been able to make.
So when you're thinking about this in an expansive way, so you're working with LGBTQ rights, you're working with immigrant rights. Are all members of your community thinking about it the same way? And are there challenges to actually telling an LGBTQ group we need to think about Black and brown issues, or an immigrant rights group to say we need to think about the LGBTQ community? Is everyone on board in these movements, or how do we work through this?
Yeah, I think that goes back to what Oscar was just saying about, there are challenges. One of the things that, working with communities is breaking through homogenous spaces, right? And so once we start doing that, when you have the first of that is part of this group are introducing these new issues that may affect, like you said, bringing immigrants' rights into the LGBTQ conversation when we're talking about activists, it took some time, because when we were thinking about it was marriage equality. It was all about marriage equality, but then, we got marriage equality, and then we're still seeing that there are people that are still suffering, right? There are still trans folks that are sitting in detention centers, and not only are they sitting in detention centers, but then you have that added layer of them being a trans, and they're put in they're misgendered and possibly placed in the wrong detention center, which can end up in very almost fatal situations. And so introducing that, it takes time, and that is a challenge. But it really does take folks getting into these spaces and speaking up about this. And of course, you'll have pushback because we talk about status quo and change and nobody wanting to change. And we have to focus on our group, but it's just making the case and showing that we are all a part of that space. And so I think we talk about being unapologetic and things like that, and it's difficult, but it has to happen for things to start moving. And like Oscar said, in the last 10 years, changes are being made, and it is difficult, it is challenging, but it takes the folks speaking up, and then the other part of it is the folks that are receiving it starting to have some folks in that speak up as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying, Fran. There's a lot of challenges. I think within that, it's really about the internal challenges that we put forward as we're trying to live this reality of intersectional work, and about really trying to understand what other communities are going through when we're not going through it ourselves. That's one of the biggest challenges that I think that comes to us, because in some spaces we might try to practice it, especially like as earlier we were talking about the pronouns, how does someone make sure that you're respectful to someone's sexual identity. But it's not just showing it in that space. It's really having to practice that through your life, to making sure that every space you go to, you try to either bring that consciousness with you, or that challenge into the group, to make sure that people are actually working together. Because as an undocumented person myself, every day that I wake up, it's an act of civil disobedience to being inside this country. And I know that for people who either have a different sexual identity or who have a different sexual preference. It's a challenge that I don't understand. But at least at the core level, I can understand that they're going through a difficulty, and that difficulty needs recognition within the work that we're doing. Because those members, some of them are part of our community, are undocumented, are part of the Latinx community. But even if they're not, it doesn't mean that what they're going through isn't real. And I think furthermore, it's also a bigger challenge when we're talking about like what communities are going through, because there's sometimes like a talk that almost seems like the oppression Olympics, right? Like one group wants to talk about how they're suffering more than another group. And I think conversations like that most of the times don't develop from the people who are suffering. They're like outside narratives. They're being pushed. So we're arguing against each other and we can't really advance forward together. So I think that's where it really becomes tricky. And how do we make sure to not let that judgment to pass, to jump and co-opt our narrative as a unity that we're trying to move forward together. And even when it comes to like the anti-blackness that is prevalent, just the same as sexism and a patriarchal mindset, like that's obvious in just about every space. And it's a very very difficult thing to get rid of, because unfortunately a lot of it is so rooted in the culture that we don't even know we're perpetuating this idea sometimes. So it's I think the first step is acknowledging that we all have our own biases, but that at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is build this inclusive space where, and to be frankly, like I think there's also like a common enemy within the work that we're doing that comes into this like white supremacist mentality that is very patriarchal as well, and understanding that we're trying to get to the same place, and if you're suffering, then I'm suffering as well. But I need to acknowledge your pain as it is on its own, and then make sure that we can heal together. And I feel like if most of our people that I think that those are who are as politically conscious or care about the community, and it's a lot of us, it's not just a handful, that we will try to continue that conversation, try to advance every space that we're in, and to make it to a place where we understand why the intersectional, we're not even saying intersectional anymore, because we understand that the work is the same thing.
And I think it helps us too with this is to stop, because we have to work in so many reactionary modes. Like we're always having to do something, and something's happening to this community, something. But once we have, we're working with this unity, we have this unified front, it kind of helps where we can start having these proactive sessions so that we're always not in this reactionary mode when these supremacist actions take place, or when the narratives are being pushed by these outside folks that are kind of coming in, because that's the goal. Like if you're fighting one another, or we're reacting to what is being said by these other communities, then we're not seeing what's going on out where like where our climate is still being messed up, where economic injustices are still happening, where folks are still hungry. So I think so that helps.
So what do you do? And I mean, my experience has been a lot where when you're fighting for social change, or you're negotiating with political or elected officials, where there's this feeling that there's only so much that can be done, right? There's always a response of I can only do so much, or things move slowly. And I've also heard things and been told like literally, well, we might be able to do this for the immigrant community, but the black community is really the problem, or I've also seen the immigrant rights community. A lot of them work really closely with faith-based groups and the Catholic Church specifically. And then how does that work with the LGBTQ community, or if you have faith-based groups that are anti-LGBTQ, that are how do you so it's not just. I think we can sit here and say, hey, let's work together because we all actually believe in that. But how do you navigate these spaces and pushes and pulls into different directions that I feel like are often trying to divide people?
I think part of it is it shows its importance, such importance of the coalition building. When the Pulse nightclub shooting happened, what ended up going on is that Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee put together this summit, and she brought in all of these folks from various communities, from the faith community, from the neighborhood, from the immigrant community, from the LGBTQ community. And the year before, we were fighting for the non-discrimination ordinance. Some of those folks that I couldn't have even like looked at, because I just couldn't understand why would you tell the community to vote down this ordinance. And so we end up seeing this common thread in that guns kill folks, right? And that people that people are dying in the streets because of access to these weapons in this way. And so at that moment, I was standing, the president of the GLBT Caucus was standing next to a bishop, and this bishop is standing next to this constable, and the constable. So it was just this moment where we were all in a space trying to figure out a way to move legislation forward, trying to come together in community from these various communities. So I think part of it is finding that common issue, and then from there working together, and then using that as a springboard and continuing with the conversation, because it's easy to like have this one moment and then it kind of falls apart. But I think continuing that conversation so that we can start seeing what happens when we're working together and learning about communities of difference, because at the end of it all, it's difference exists, and what we think we don't understand, what we're confused about, or what have you, it's difference, because we don't live in those experiences. But at the end of it all, everyone should be raised to a playing field that we are as of equity, and that equity can exist even when difference exists.
Yeah, I think it is a slow pace thing. Like I think a lot of these are really huge concepts too, like how to really understand the intersectional work, understanding the violence and how it affects different people, and to really go into the mindset of how to solve these enormous problems that have been along for centuries, but more than anything have been structured to a point where it's like embedded in everyday culture in this country. But I think that it is a slow-paced process in changing that mindset, because like even for myself, in over a decade, I'm nowhere near that final threshold. So I think that in that political mindset, it's not the end of it's not the destination. It's like through the journey in which you're doing it. But at the same time, at the pace that we have news and information coming in, there is a lot of things that we can share to help that advance a little quicker. But it does take a while to break down all this mentality that has been pushed into our communities. And then there's also the conversation about, well, why is it that we always expect the victim to solve these problems? So it's always like the people who oppress our community want us, who have been suffering for some years, to give them the answer of why is it that our communities are where they are, without mentioning the fact that they put us here, without mentioning the historical context of how we got here. Just like ignore slavery, ignore. I'm Mexican, so I have indigenous roots within this land. I'm brown. I mean, I'm not a white Hispanic, and into understanding what happens with the Asian community as well as people with different sexual identities, with different religious ideas. Like, they oppress all our communities have been oppressed for so long and then we have been uneducated structurally uneducated, so we don't know our history. And then if we could only go back as far as my grandfather, and then not knowing what he or my grandmother or what they did, and then how they developed those ideas and their religious practice and their behaviors, and everything we do is mimicking like white people of wealth. Then we don't know our own language, then we don't know our actual religion, we don't know how we got here, and of course we're going to act disoriented, because our history and our culture has been disoriented. So when people of color do something that is considered wrong, you can go back and see how truly disregarding of humanity the laws were, to where they were criminalized for if you even go down to the stories of black men that were hung for looking at white women. If you go to the amount of Mexicans who lived in Texas and California through all this before it was anything had to do with the U.S., and how the land was taken from them, and how Mexicans were hung for to take their property for speaking Spanish, and then even within the church, how the indigenous language was basically ripped out of their tongues with their indigenous practices. And then parents grow up, our great-grandparents grow up witnessing and living through all this, so they don't pass this on to the next generation because supposedly the laws are changing, supposedly we're advancing, and they don't want them to carry that trauma. And then our parents grow up ignorant of what happened to their great-grandparents, and they think that they've always been on a level playing field. And then you have a lot of youth today who actually feel like we've always been on a level playing field, but we keep making mistakes. And it's true that we keep making mistakes, but it's not completely our fault. Like, it's because we're never on a level playing field. Because especially as you see in the black community, from slavery to Jim Crow laws to mass incarceration, like, it's obvious there that these structures were there to not allow us to advance. So for us, for me, like, it's very difficult to see like how we progress as a community, and then how is it that requirement from the answer comes for us. They take everything we have, they blame everything on us, and then they want us to solve the problem within ourselves without and segregating us from the rest of the world, which doesn't work. And it's just what we told us that, you know, we can't take down the master's house with using the master's tools. So it's something where we have to get creative to really figure out how we create a new culture and how we embed our own principles rooted in the finding of from what it is we left in our indigenous history to our new culture that we have right now, and the beauty and mixing that beauty together.
So when you were talking, actually made me think of DACA, because when you said something like the laws had changed and we thought things were different, and now we're in this moment where, you know, there's some people who've had a work permit and protection from deportation for about almost 4 years now, and there's a risk of it being taken away. And so, I mean, I've heard different opinions on this. I feel like I've heard this more in the black community than anything, where people are saying, just anecdotally, but people are saying it's really not a difference, that Trump doesn't scare them because there wasn't really a big change even with Obama as president, and the community was under attack and people are being killed by the police, and so, you know, and so maybe some people who are already there are realizing that who the president was, or even if some laws changed, that their lives or the lives of their community hadn't gone through a really big change. But I think that, you know, with the DACA and about 800,000 people who got a work permit, like, so I mean, was it like a magic trick, right? Like, hey, look over here, pretend like everything's okay for a couple years, but really we can just take it away, so maybe nothing really changed, or I don't know. What do you think about that?
It's one of those things, like, the more things change, the more things stay the same, you know, because it's a really big, it's an issue, but I feel that it's kind of like when it comes to citizenship, it's what a friend of mine was telling us about, like, the emancipation and how black people are looking for freedom papers. And for a lot of DACA communities, that's what citizenship is, like a freedom paper. The document that supposedly adds you to the club, but in reality, it doesn't do anything for you. So when it comes to how the laws shift, I think it's important to realize to understand the laws. It's important to realize the political realm in which we live in. But it's also important for us to try to develop the culture within our own communities, and how we shift our own narrative, and how we use our resources and what we have here differently, to where it's improving our lives, to where it's improving our community. And if the educational system has failed us, then how do we build those structures, like they had when the Black Panthers first started, or the Black Wall Street? Like, there's a lot of learnings there. I think that at the end of the day, you're right. Like, I don't think DACA, well, as a DACA recipient, it didn't do a whole lot of difference to me. Now, what it means today is that the Department of Homeland Security has my fingerprints, knows my address, and I own my house. So it's not like I can just get up and leave, it's a very frightening thing to wake up to after the elections, and to realize what can happen. But at the same time, it's also considering, you know, why my nephews need to learn about this, why they need to know about the structures that are in place, and how they can use, how they grow up, and the person that they turn into is going to be, I think, a key difference in how the country and people move forward.
So you both mentioned there's issues of concern at this moment. So how do we move forward, and where are the moments of opportunity? The mayor of Houston made an announcement on Monday saying that Houston is a welcoming city and that he will protect the immigrant community and other groups as much as he can within the law. And he mentioned things like Houston is a place where people can love who they love, so making a reference to the LGBTQ community, making reference to different religions, people with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a large vision, expansive vision of what welcoming means. So what would that mean for you all here in Houston, and what's the path forward?
I think for the community at large, I mean, especially for the LGBT community, part of that is going to be making sure that there are policies that are in place to ensure that folks can live, work, raise a family. Because we can talk about welcoming, and I love this city. This is my home. I'm a native Houstonian. I've been here. I've not lived anywhere else but Houston. But at the same time, I want to make sure that folks that are living in the shadows don't have to go further in the shadows. And so I think having policies and making sure that we are able to, whether that is through city council or whether it's the communities coming together to put something on the on the ballot for Houston. But I think just having clear-cut policies that actually protect, that are inclusive, that keep in mind what is affected here. I mean, the city is, we talk all day long about the city speaking the most languages and being multicultural and this, and being so broad. Our community is so broad. But if we don't have policies in place that protect the most folks, then, at the end of it all, we're just going with beating the same drum. So it's just really getting into a space, getting into a room, and being able to put policy put policy in action.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's what it comes down to. It's not just about what he made as a public statement to the community. It's like, what is the city going to do to protect the people who have been who are the bloodline for this for Houston. He kept saying diversity and acknowledging how many different consulates are in Houston, and how many different nationalities or religious practices, and it's Houston has always been welcoming to the idea of celebrating people's culture, but what we want to make sure is that it's also respecting people's lives. That it's also acknowledging that their people are here, and that we've always been a part of the community here. That what we contribute is not just economical; it's really what makes Houston what Houston is. It's not just the food, but it's also our languages, our practices. It's also being able to drive to work and not being afraid. For a lot of immigrants, it's not being afraid to get deported or to go taken to jail, or being harassed, or being part of a hate crime, being victim of a hate crime because you speak with an accent. And even for a lot of citizens in the black community, what is it to be feared to get shot while trying to get to work? And those are not just something that we perpetuate. That's the reality in which we live in America today. What their communities are suffering. So it's great to hear the mayor say that, but we're really looking for, just like Fran said, is to implement some policies and then see how we can continue, because this also means we have to take on Texas. Mm-hmm. This also means we have to take on what's happening at the national level, and I think that given where Houston is, we can do that. We need to bring on the fight, because we've been fighting it for years, and this isn't this is something different, but it's nothing new.
So what does that fight look like? Because President-elect Trump, campaigned on saying things like he would take funding, and he said it after the election, away from cities that call themselves sanctuary cities. Greg Abbott has been tweeting about that as well, and now there's plans for an ordinance that would make it impossible to pass these laws that would protect people. So what does that actually look like, and how does Houston, as you say, take on Texas and the federal government?
I think we're constituents, right? We vote And I think part of it is that we have this relationship with our elected officials where we haven't really harnessed the power of the collective, right? And at the end of this, we should be able to stand in front of our electeds as our constituents and start talking about demanding this is what we want. This is how we want you to vote. We voted for you to and I'm talking from a political perspective. Now I know there is many ways, to address this, but as far as like from a political perspective, when we elected, when we use our vote is saying that we want you to represent us. And so being in front of them, knocking on their doors, like talking to them, having folks talk to them, and just show them that as their constituents, this is what we want. We want this protection, so they can challenge these and kill these bills that are trying to be brought out that would like deny our funding. And to do this because I know that Texas, we have to create a budget. Like that's the thing we have to do. And so if they're going to try to like deny funding or do something like this is where we need our electeds to be able to challenge that. And to have them to challenge that we have to be in their face, and more than just like one lobby day, but it's like really flooding them with this message that this is how the constituents want you to vote.
Yeah, because if people are suffering, like if you can't work because of how things are happening, then that means your job should be to bother your elected officials. That means your job should be educating other people what's happening, because if you're losing your job because the community wants to feel or wants to be protected, like that says something about the state of not just the city or Texas or the country as a whole. That really says something about our culture and how we value what we're doing. I mean, a lot of the times people see like the elections or being civically engaged like they do for the World Cup in soccer, right? And football, where every 4 years everybody wants to put on the jersey, but in between the time nobody even talks about it. And that's something wrong within that's a problem within our culture, that it's not just every 4 years on when you should be involved. It's really knowing who you're electing, who's in the office, what do they do, what do they represent. Most of the time people don't know what the authority, well, not most of the time, I think in general people do not know like what the city council members do, what the county commissioners do, like what do they get paid for, or what is their role. Even with the sheriffs, or the difference between a police officer, a constable, a sheriff's department. And that's an issue, because that's also not being taught in schools. That's also not being, that information not really being shared. So people are not growing up to know how to be a functioning member of this so-called society that the U.S. wants to put forward. So I think for us, yes, we have to figure out how, what does it mean for Texas when Houston builds the place that we want to see within the Welcoming Houston. And then what we can do as Houstonians to keep in mind that if these people at the Texas level are not representing us, then who do we vote? How do we vote them off? And how do we send a clear message to whoever wants to be the next governor or state representative that it's not about who we put into office, it's that if you're not following what the community wants, you'll be voted off. Because too many times people see politicians like if they were the saviors or the saints. Like if we put this one person there, everything's going to be solved. And that's a distracting, that's a magic trick that we tell ourselves just because we want to feel like we won something. And it's a selling point too. It's a marketing thing that's sold to us. But if we're like, no, it's not about who we put into the office. It's making sure that that person is no longer in that position, and send that message to the next person who wants to run this place. And if people cannot represent the community, then they should know that they should not be running for these positions, to get the most eligible person to be there. And then for us at a national level, it's like looking out at what Trump is going to do for different counties as well as different cities and states, and then how does that correlate with Texas? And then Houston has a lot of resources. Like there is a lot of things Houston could do. If you think creatively, like just as Chicago, New York, and different cities in California have done. So there isn't a lot of answers I would say that we could put forward. But what there is like we know is we have people who our lives are at stake, who are going to put it down on the line, and to think creatively. What are the tangible things that we can do? And when things are thrown at us, how do we make sure we throw something back?
So this has been a great discussion, and I think that you have answered most of my questions, but I don't want to end without you being able to explain, if you want to talk about your organization how people can get involved, any plans you have that are going on right now and then in the new year. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. Okay, so, well, with the Houston GLBT Political Caucus, we meet the first Wednesday of every month at the Montrose Center. Our business starts at 7 o'clock. We have snacks at 6:30, so you can come in and then you'll find out all of our updates. We have several different committees. Frances is on the board, and she runs our Education and Advocacy Committee. So feel free to come in. We are working with other LGBTQ organizations as well as other progressive organizations as we look towards the legislative session next month. We just held a legislative forum, LGBT legislative forum, and we got some good ideas from the elected officials on how we can proceed going forward. So first Wednesday of every month, and we'll see you there.
Great.
I'm coming up. I'm also part of New Leaders Council, and New Leaders Council is a progressive leadership institute, and it really teaches folks we provide tools for people that want to make change, that want to organize in their own realm. And so you can check us out. I am a co-director of this 2017 institute along with my colleague Shelby Hansen.
Yeah, so with United We Dream, we're one of the largest immigrant youth-led organizations in the country. And here in Houston, we do, every Thursday we have community gatherings where we try to plan on, specifically on this, when you were talking about how to make Houston a welcoming and safe city for all people, no matter their immigrant status, their sexual preference, their religion. And every Thursday we meet up at Mecca. The address is 1900 Kane Street. Our Houston office is suite number 116. And if people want to get involved, look us up on Facebook or Twitter. We're at UWD Houston. Our Facebook and Twitter is at UWD Houston. This coming Tuesday, we will be at City Council to talk to the City Council members about the importance of why we want to work with the mayor, and really giving a shout out to the mayor to understand that we are looking to collaborate with him. We're looking to fighting alongside him as long as he's protecting our communities. So if there are concerns about what happens at a state level or a national level, that we want to work to make sure that Houston is a safe place for our communities, and that if the mayor has our back, we'll also have his back. Next Thursday, there is a celebration, so if people want to come in, we're almost at the end of the year, we want to make sure that we at least give our times, as hard as we work and we do things, that we celebrate together. We give that moment for us to heal together as well. So look us up. Aside from this, we'll also be doing a lot of Texas work and coming to next year, looking into the 7G. So there's a lot of things people can do and a lot of ways people can get involved. So we're just asking people to come in, participate, bring your expertise. We're looking for people, and it's a multi-generation space. I think one of the youngest people who was there last Thursday was about 16 years old, and the oldest one was well in her 60s. So it's different people from different backgrounds coming together to see how we can make this happen.
Great. Well, thank you both. This was really a great conversation, and hopefully, this won't be the last for sure. And I look forward to us seeing how our organizations and others can work together. For me, I definitely am concerned about a lot of issues coming up next year, but what I'm really excited about is I feel like a lot of people are coming out and getting involved and are fired up, and I too am a native Houstonian. I love Texas, and just like United We Dream is saying, hashtag here to stay, I'm hashtag here to stay. I'm a Texan, I'm a Houstonian, and so I'm going to fight for this place that I love, and I hope to be here for a long time and fighting alongside you all. So it's really an honor and a privilege to know you both, and I appreciate all the work you do. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Movement Talk.